Okay, so welcome everyone to the beginning of New Jersey I-Day. This is the 52nd New Jersey I-Day. My name is Patrick Stokes, the president of the Central Jersey CPCU Society Chapter. With us also Laura Panesso, president of the New Jersey Chapter. And special welcome to Amy Waninger of Lead Beyond Bias. Network, what?
Lead at any level.
Lead at any level. Sorry, I didn't have that in your bio.
That's okay.
So, Amy and I met her last year at the national conference. She's amazing. I haven't seen her presentation yet, so I'm really interested in this. It's definitely something that doesn't get spoken about enough, and a lot of people need to pay more attention to it. So with that, let me just read you Amy's bio, and I'll pass the mic over to her. So Amy is the CEO of Lead Any Level. She's advancing diversity and inclusive leadership in the insurance ecosystem and beyond. She's the author of multiple books, including Network Beyond Bias. Amy earned her CPCU designation in 2016. She also holds the associate designations from the institutes in data and analytics, information technology, management, claims, and general insurance. In 2018, she earned her Certified Insurance Data Manager designation from IDMA. She's a professional member of the National Speakers Association, a certified virtual presenter, and a certified change management professional. Her other credentials include 2 degrees from Indiana University and a world's best mom coffee mug. All right. And with that, one more plug for Amy. She so graciously donated a few copies of her book. So we will be raffling one off to the participants of this session and a few other times throughout I-Day. And also for all the participants who don't win the free copy, she is offering a 25% discount. So follow our social media accounts, and I have all the information out there. With that being said, Amy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Couldn't find my mute button again. So welcome everyone. CPCU groups are my favorite groups because this is, for me, where the whole change in my career started. It all started with the CPCU conference in 2016, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that in a minute. But I'm curious, and you can do show of hands or, in the chat, just say, yes, that's me. How many of you, when you think about networking, your first thought is something that looks a little bit like this guy?
Oh, God.
Yeah?
I hope not.
So a lot of us, right, have this guy in our head. And I'll tell you a little bit more about my experience with this guy being in my head here in a little bit. But, we think about somebody who kind of deals their business cards out like a blackjack dealer in Vegas, somebody who is, really transactional in their relationships, and somebody who, probably doesn't really care about us all that much. And this used to be my perception of networking. This is who I thought of. And when somebody would say, oh, you should go to networking events, I would think, oh, dear God, I don't want to be that guy. Right? And so this perception got in my way for a long time. So if this is who you think of when you think of networking, just know that there is hope. And you're in the exact right place, because we're going to talk about what networking is and isn't. And spoiler alert, it's not this guy. So since so many of us think of that guy, I'm curious, why bother showing up to this talk today if your preconceived notion was she's going to teach me how to be that guy? What are you hoping to get out of this session, or what do you think is important about networking? Or you can type it in the chat, either one. Tony, why did you come back a 44th time?
Slow learner. I always take something every time.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad. Oh, Tina's here because of Tony. Thank you, Tony. Yes, Hillary, developing relationships. Absolutely. That's what networking is. It's developing relationships. And it was not until I realized I'd been doing this my whole career, but I didn't call it networking, that I was able to kind of shift in my brain what I thought about networking and be okay with it, and not be, not have this pit in my stomach and feel out of alignment with my values by making connections with people. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and about where this all came from. In 2016, I was on the plane to Hawaii, going to my first ever conference. I had, already worked in the information technology space for about 17 years at that point. I'd been in insurance for about, 7 years at that time. So, I mean, it had been a while. And I'd never been to a conference before, and I was on the plane and I was feeling really not good about walking into a room full of 3,000 other professionals and trying to make friends, right? Or trying to network with this group of people where I knew no one. And I decided that the reason I was struggling was because I felt like networking was sort of this fake thing that I didn't want to do. And I don't see myself as somebody who's, real schmoozy. And I had to make it okay for me to be there and to network. So I decided to gamify it. And I picked, out of thin air kind of a number. I said, okay, every day I'm going to try to meet 3 people by helping them in some way. And it might be, sorting papers for somebody before their session, or recommending a book, or asking a question in a breakout. Whatever it was, I had to find 3 people to help each day. And it was a 4 or 5 day conference. I walked out of there with way more than 15 contacts. So this worked for me. But the other thing that happened is I kept going to the sessions about how to make the insurance industry more diverse and inclusive. And while the sessions were phenomenal that I attended, I walked out not with a whole lot of what I could do to influence that result, right? What could I, as one person in a big company in a huge industry, actually do that would make a difference? And I thought, man, wouldn't it be great if I could go to one of these sessions and come out with some notes for me, right? Not about the problem, but about how to solve it. And so I pitched that to the society for the following year, for 2017. And they said, yeah, that'd be great. Let's do that. And then I had to figure out what I was going to say, which is like the hardest part of the presentation, right? Figuring out what you're going to talk about. But what I came up with actually was the assessment that we're going to walk through today, and a lot of content around why that's so hard. And then I don't know how many of you were around in 2017, but the conference got canceled. I didn't have an audience to share all of this amazing stuff that I had learned and all of these things that I had implemented in my own career that had changed everything for me. And I was really bummed. I did get to present in 2018, and it was one of 35 presentations I did that year. And I think Tony was at half of those. So, but this all came from the desire to help people in the insurance industry do something different so we can see a different result in our industry. All right, so let me skip this. And here's what I want you to take away. If you hear nothing else I say today, we all believe that our heart's in the right place. And this is where I was. I thought, man, I don't know what else I can be doing because my heart's in the right place. And, I really am a champion for diversity and inclusion, right? This is my thinking going into the work that I discovered, that I did, and discovered that I was not doing everything I could be doing. We all believe our heart to be in the right place. We all believe ourselves to be good people. And of course we are, right? But here's the thing. Your heart can't be in the right place if you never move your feet. And so what I'm going to ask you to do today is to think about, where do you believe your heart to be? And are you putting your feet where it matters? Are you actually putting your heart in the right place by moving your feet? What we're going to cover is how to break the cycle of unconscious bias. We'll talk about how to network like a champ. And then very briefly, we'll touch on including others on purpose. Okay. So a little bit of brain science to start us off. We all want to make good decisions for our careers, yes. And we all need more data to make good decisions, yes. Well, if you had 11 million bits of information every second to drive your decision making, you could probably make good decisions, right? What if you threw all but 40 of those away? Could you still make a good decision? Probably not. Well, guess what? That's what we're all doing all day, every single second. 11 million sensory inputs hit our amygdala, and our brain sorts in those moments, been there, done that, or that might kill me. And if it's been there, done that, we ignore it. And if it's something that our brain perceives might kill us, our flight or fight response is triggered, right? We get adrenaline coursing through our body. We, get a rush. We try to figure out what to do with this. Now think about in the days when we could all commute, right? In the days before the illness, pre-dystopian future, when we could go to work, you probably arrived at the office sometimes not remembering certain stretches of highway or all the stoplights you hit along the way, right? Because your brain, in all those seconds, was taking those 11 million inputs and pushing them in the been there, done that category, and they were never to be thought of again. Now imagine that you're in traffic and you get distracted in your thoughts and you almost rear end a car. What happens? Heart starts racing. You might shake a little bit. You're probably sweating, right? Freaking out a little bit. And it takes a while before you regulate your body back down to tell yourself, right? Nothing happened. My rates aren't going to go up. Yes, it was a Lexus, but I didn't actually touch it, right? we got to kind of regulate ourselves back to normal. And we do that through our thoughts. But our bodies act first and our brains act second. So what happens is then there's this third category called, I need to think about this some more, right? And so if everything gets through all those other filters, it might get up to this part of our brain where we actually do our thinking and decision making. But we don't get 11 million opportunities up there. We get 40 per second. That's it. So we're really not using that much information to make a good decision most of the time. What gets filtered out and what gets filtered in is based on our own personal history, our own personal biases that have been building up over time, over a lifetime for us. And if you think about it, when we were, cave dwellers and we would step out every morning and we'd say, okay, is this thing that's approaching something I can eat or something that's going to eat me, right? These were very split-second life and death decisions we had to make. Now, most of us have evolved socially, intellectually, emotionally since then. Stay out of the comments section of your favorite website, but, most of us have evolved. But this physiology is still with us. It's still driving our behaviors, our gut reactions. So it's probably worth knowing where it comes from. Before you were even born, your identity was being formed. If you've ever had a baby, your spouse has ever had a baby, you've ever had a friend with a baby, or if your mom had a baby, you probably know that one of the first questions people ask is it going to be a boy or a girl? And now that we can know that through science, or at least know what gender our babies are going to be assigned at birth through ultrasounds, that's a really common question, right? Before we're even born, people want to know how to talk about us, what color gifts to buy, what color are you going to paint the nursery? And once we get here, things get even more complicated, right? Because we might be sick, or we might be healthy, or we might be a big baby or a small baby, or we might have a lot of hair or no hair at all, right? And so people talk to us and treat us differently based on what we look like when we get here. And in fact, not even what we look like, but what our mothers look like. So the race of your mother determines the kind of care you get in the hospital, how likely you are to survive childbirth, how likely she is to survive childbirth. And, that's part of our identity before we even draw our first breath, right? So we start to then notice things in our environment, touches, sounds, smells that lead us toward being fed and being nurtured and being loved on, or things in our environment that lead us toward a vaccine or a cold sponge or a bright light, right? And it doesn't take us long to figure out that some inputs lead to good things and some inputs lead to bad things and poor treatment of us, right? Things that we don't like. In fact, babies as young as 6 months old start to show a preference for people of their own race, not the race of their parents, but their own race. And a lot of that is based on how other people treat them relative to their race. So this happens really early on. And it only gets more complicated from there, right? We start to notice who's like us and who's not like us. And we develop over time this sense of who we are. At the same time, we're taking on the values of our families, of our communities, of the society around us. And our socialization isn't actually complete until we've internalized those values to the point that we can self-regulate, right? This is why you probably don't wear cutoffs and flip-flops into your home office, right? Because you have internalized the values of your company, and you know that if you walk into a major carrier in cutoffs and flip-flops, you're probably not going to be there very long. Okay.
So I like that.
We also make judgments, right, about people who don't share our identities and values. And we start to choose our experiences based on what will affirm our identities, align with our values,
Don't you?
and reinforce our judgments. And I think we've got somebody who is not on mute who should be. Patrick, I don't know if you can deal with that so we don't have background noise.
Mine, they said they had the oil, the coconut oil.
But here's the thing, we can't as leaders, and you are all leaders if you're here. If you have your CPCU designation, if you have gone through the classes, if you have started the classes, if you are giving up your personal time to sit through I-Day presentations and learn more about your industry, you are a leader. Make no mistake about it. And the people around you see you as such. So you better start seeing yourself that way. Okay? We cannot, as leaders, choose our experiences based on what's easiest for us in the moment.
Get a whole bunch.
Or that aligns with what we already believe to be true. We need to expand our perspective to include more people's values, understand how their identities are affected by the decisions that we make, understand the judgments that they might be making about us and others. We need to choose more varied experiences so we can actually make the best decisions for the most people the most of the time that we can. Those are the kinds of leaders we want to follow, right? So those are also the kinds of leaders we should aspire to be. Now, while all of this is hardwired into your brain, right? All of these default responses are hardwired, and we start to make decisions without realizing we're doing it. Those, by the way, become unconscious biases. There are some steps we can take to move beyond these defaults, to actually interrupt them and change them, right? I'm going to give you 3 steps right now to help with that. The first is notice your own response. Notice how you feel in a new situation or with new people. Are you immediately comfortable? If so, why? Are you immediately uncomfortable or anxious? If so, why? Do you feel like you're out of alignment with your values? Do you feel like, this is reminding you of some experience that you've had in the past? Is there some identity you're protecting with this response? Noticing our biases takes away the power that they have over us. Naming our feelings and understanding what's behind them takes away the power our biases have to drive our behaviors and decisions. The second step is to observe the responses of others. When you're in, I don't know how it is where you work, but everywhere I've worked, people have differences of opinion about things. Have you guys noticed that? Maybe it's just me. Okay, so whenever there's a little tiny change in the workplace, no matter how small, and I'm talking like super small, right? The example I love to use is the soap in the bathrooms. There's kind of been this like slow transition over the course of, the last few years to move from liquid soap to foam soap, because foam soap lasts longer and costs less, right? Goes further. There are people who have differences of opinion about what kind of soap should be in those soap dispensers. Guaranteed. And maybe you're pro foam soap and maybe you're pro liquid soap, but I guarantee you, you're probably either on one side or the other, or you absolutely don't care. And somebody else in your office feels a different way from you. Oh, drip coffee pot to a Keurig. Oh my goodness. Yes. Especially if you got to bring your own coffee. Hello. So, or even at home, it's hard, right? So you got to know what flavors to buy. So any little change causes people to have differences of opinion. Why? Their experiences, their judgments, their values, their identities are different from yours. And what you can do is observe those responses and think about, where is that coming from for them? And if you know the person well enough, you can ask them, hey, I noticed the other day when we were in the meeting and we were talking about, changing the coffee makers at work and the break room, I was all for it and you were against it. Where's that coming from? What do you know that I don't know? Is it a cost issue? Is it a convenience issue? What's going on? And, anytime you're having any kind of discussion about policy, asking the questions behind the responses will get you a lot further to the assumptions that people are making and the assumptions that you are making about what's happening. And you can file all of those responses away, because in the third step, you're going to press your pause button. Your pause button is a physical space on your body. It's called the philtrum or medial cleft. It's that weird little divot right under your nose. And when you put your finger on your pause button, it gives you just a few seconds to go back into all the responses that you've observed and pull the best one for the moment. It will not always be the same thing. Your audience will change, your context will change, you will change, right? You'll have new information to rely on if you do this consistently. But think about it. If you only get 40 bits of information per second, and you can put your finger on your pause button for 3 or 4 seconds, you can move from 40 bits to 80, 120, 160, 200. And is there anybody who can't make a better decision with 200 data points than they could from 40? Give yourself those precious few seconds. The other thing it does, it's really nice, is it keeps your mouth shut long enough to think. So you're not just blurting out the first thing that came to your head, right? And I know for me, a lot of times my first action is to say what I'm thinking. And I have learned that that is not always the best course of action in a given situation. Okay. All right. Let's talk about, what does this have to do with networking? Well, your network probably reflects a lot of your own biases, if you've not thought about it in any kind of strategic way. Grab a sheet of paper, might be a notepad, a Post-it note, an index card, the back of your electric bill, whatever you got in front of you. Even if you've done this exercise before, Tony, please do it, because it's always good to check in with yourself and see how you're doing over time. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is, down the left-hand side of your paper, stack the letters of the word CHAMP, C-H-A-M-P. And across the top, write the letters of the word ignore with 2 G's. That's spelled wrong on purpose. As you're doing that, I want to give you a couple of caveats. The first is, I want this to be a top of mind activity. So in each category, pick the person that pops into your head first. Best relationship, strongest relationship, known the longest, had coffee with the most recently, whatever it is. Okay. Second caveat is, if you don't have somebody in a category, that's fine. Just leave it blank. Third is, this is not exhaustive. There will be categories that I miss. That's okay. You want to add to it, add to it. Okay. And the fourth is, anything you see that you don't like, you have the power to change. Now, that's a Spider-Man thing, right? With great power comes great responsibility. So once you know, now you're on the hook for fixing it. And this is where I was. The first time I took my assessment, I hated my results. I changed everything. Everything changed for me. And when I saw what was possible by just doing this assessment and holding myself accountable to it, I knew that I had something important that I needed to share that went way beyond one CPCU conference, right? So that's why I'm still doing this now. All right. So CHAMP is an acronym that describes 5 types of people that you need in your network. And again, you may have more than one. I want you to pick the most one, okay? So the C is for customer. This is somebody that you would go to if you needed a customer's perspective for something. Can't be somebody internal to your own company, though. Has to be outside. Somebody who exchanges money for the goods and services your company provides. Now, if you're a broker and you say, well, I work with companies, and you can't write down State Farm, right? That's not a person. It's Jake from State Farm, okay? In my case, my customer is Vonda. The H is for someone you've hired or helped get a job. If you're a hiring manager, just write down the last person you hired. If you're not a hiring manager, who have you written a letter of recommendation for? Who have you introduced to a hiring manager? Who have you introduced to a recruiter? Who have you, sent gig work to if they do gig work, right? Who have you written a letter of recommendation or a LinkedIn recommendation for in the last couple months? Put their name down. We all want a high value network. And the best way to get that is to be of value to your network. What better way to do that than to help people be gainfully employed? Especially right now when unemployment is at, a ridiculously high number. and especially for women, and especially for Black and Latinx women, right? Like we got a lot of work to do right now in this economy to get people back to gainful employment. The A is for an associate. An associate is somebody who has about the same level of responsibility as you, maybe in your organization, maybe not. This is the person that you call up when you're having a rough day, you invite out for coffee, maybe something a little stronger. I'm not here to judge, but somebody that's kind of a pacing partner for you in your career. The M is for your mentor. Mentor is somebody, maybe it's somebody who's formally assigned to you at work or through the CPCU Society. The Society has a wonderful mentoring program that you can sign up for if you haven't already. Maybe it's someone informally that you look up to, somebody like a Mike Cassellini, maybe, that, when he gives you career advice, you listen and you take notes and you go do what he said because you know that he's got experience being where you are. And if you don't have somebody like that, maybe it's somebody that, you listen to their podcast or you read their blog or you follow them on social media because what they say is important for you in your career. Write that person's name in the M row. And finally, P is for protege. Now, again, this might be somebody that is formally assigned, but it also might just be somebody that you are, when they call, you drop everything to help them because you see their potential and you want them to succeed. And I feel a little bad having Deidre in this column because she probably helps me as much as I help her. But the week that I filled this out, she was top of mind because we just had a conversation about this. So I have 5 in my Champ network. How many do you have? You can hold them up. You can put them in the chat. 5, 4, 3, 5. Seeing a little bit of everything. Great. All right, good. If you have all 5, congratulations. You're doing pretty well. You're getting a good 360-degree view of your industry, of your career, of your company. If you don't have all 5, think about where could you find these folks? Where can you go? Where can you show up differently so you can fill in those gaps? Okay. Now let's talk about what perspectives does your network ignore? If the person on your list is outside of your industry, the insurance industry, put an X next to their name. Tony, do you have one yet? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, you don't. Tony never has one in this category. And actually, I'm lying to you right now because I have 3, not 4. Howard is in my same industry, so I need to fix this. But I have 3. I equals 3. How many do you have? Put it in the chat or hold them up. Just 1, 5, excellent. Okay, 5. So why is it good to get out of our own industry? Well, insurance is not on the cutting edge of all things. It might surprise you to know. And some of the problems that the insurance industry is trying to solve for itself, other people have been solving for some time now, especially when it comes to technology, right? But also the insurance industry solves a lot of problems for other people. Most of your clients probably don't work in the insurance industry. Most of your company's customers work elsewhere. And the best way to innovate for them, the best way to solve problems is to understand them from your customers' perspectives, right? The more we can solve problems for money, the longer we stay in business. Sound about right? Okay. The first G in ignore is for a different generation than you. So if the person's at least 10 years older than you or at least 10 years younger than you, put an X in the first G column. Now, if you're a Gen Xer, this is the only time that works to your advantage because there are still folks in the workforce older than us and there are still folks in the workforce younger than us. But every other time in your life, being a Gen Xer has absolutely no benefit whatsoever, as Tony will tell you. All right, so in my case, I have 5. How many do you have? 3, 2, 4, 5. Excellent. All right, we need people with more experience than us in our networks so they can point out cycles and trends where we don't see them, right? But we especially need people younger in our networks. Why? The whole economy is changing to meet the needs, expectations, and demands of younger consumers and younger employees. They do not interact with the world the same way people my age and older do, right? I could not have imagined 20 years ago that instead of stocking my shelves with CDs to prove how incredibly, cool I was, right? Spending thousands and thousands of dollars to have CDs on my shelf, that someday I would have those all in a box in the basement because I could, for $15 a month, stream any music from anywhere, for my whole family without purchasing a thing, right? So this whole subscription model has changed the way we interact with the world. Social media has changed the way we interact with the world. But I mean, I look at the difference between the expectations of like my 18-year-old and my 12-year-old, and those differences are big, right? In the way they want to interact with goods and services in the marketplace. And don't even get me started on my 4-year-old who does not understand that everything isn't on demand. Like, she cannot wrap her head around that she can't get things right now, right? All right, the next G, and I'm not going to ask you to share anymore, but just kind of go with me here. The next G is for gender identity, different from yours. And what I mean by this, let me give you an example. I'm a cisgender woman. And for those unfamiliar with that term, what it means is that when I was born, the doctors looked at me, said, it's a girl, and they were right. But that's not everyone's experience. So I would put an X next to anyone who is not a cisgender woman, anyone who is a trans woman, a trans man, a cisgender man, or a non-binary individual, okay? Now, why is it important for me to have men in my network? Well, in the Fortune 500, 96% of CEOs are men, white men at that, and 70% of their senior leadership teams are also white men. So if I don't have men in my network, I don't have access to resources, decisions, budget, on any scale, right? Even if I work in a company. And clearly, it's harder for me to get in those rooms, right? Because I'm not one of them. So if I have people that I trust and respect, and they trust and respect me in the room where decisions are being made, they can advocate for me in my absence. Similarly, it's my job to advocate for people who can't get into the rooms that I'm in. Trans women are 4 times more likely to live in abject poverty, under $10,000 a year. It's hard for them to get work because their gender presentation may not match what's on their state-issued ID, and so they face discrimination in the hiring process. It's hard for them to leave their homes for any length of time because they don't know if they will be threatened, harassed, or assaulted in public restrooms. Imagine going to work for 8 hours a day not being able to use the restroom. Probably wouldn't stay very long. I wouldn't know that trans women of color, and Black trans women in particular, face the highest murder rates of anybody in our nation. And in fact, this year has set new records for the number of murders of trans women of color and Black trans women in particular. It's absolutely appalling. And the number of non-binary people who attempt or commit suicide is higher than any other group in terms of rate, per capita, because they're told that they don't exist. Now, I want you to imagine that if you went into your first day at work and you had to fill out a form and it said, what kind of vegetable are you? Pumpkin or turnip? How would you answer that question? Well, that's the dilemma that non-binary people face when they see a gender form that only lists male and female, right? They can't answer the question honestly. And so it's up to people who are already in to help make decisions and influence decisions and policies that help other folks get in the door. Because if people can't get in the door, they can't ever get to the table where decisions are being made, and vice versa. All right. The N is for national origin or native language different from yours. And I don't have anyone in this category in this grid, although I actually did update this grid this week for another program, and I had a couple. But it's important that we connect with people outside of our own culture, because we don't know what's universally true about people And what are assumptions that we make based on where we grew up? So if you talk to people who are from other countries, other cultures, they can give you some insights into the things that you take for granted and can help you kind of explore and see the world in a different way. The O is for sexual orientation different from yours. Now, I am not advocating that anyone go back to work and ask people what their gender identity and sexual orientation is. That will get you and me in a lot of trouble. Don't do it. But think about if you don't know of anybody at work who is out in the LGBTQ community, think about why that might be. It's not because they're not there. Half of LGBTQ people are not out at work because they fear being ostracized by their teams. They fear being alienated by their managers. They fear losing their jobs. And in fact, until this summer, it was legal in 26 states to fire someone based on their gender identity or sexual orientation until a Supreme Court ruling that said that it's not okay anymore in this nation. So there are real ramifications for people who come out when it's not safe to do so. The R is for race or ethnicity different from yours. Now, there was a study done in 2013 that showed that 75% of white people do not have a Black friend. And what that means is 75% of white people are lying about having a Black friend. We have 401 years of history in this country, even from before when we were actually a country, about who could own property. And for 256 of those years, who could be property. We spent time after that deciding who could own property and where. And even where the law wasn't segregation, a lot of the policies were. We had redlining, we had a lot of housing discrimination. There were, lots of architected and intentional ways that we have been kept apart based on our race and ethnicity. And in fact, in any major city you go to, you probably know if you live there, where to find the most authentic Indian food, where to find the most authentic Mexican food, where to find the most authentic soul food, right? Because our cities are even segregated even within the cities. Now, what that means is our schools are also segregated, our churches are segregated. Work is the least segregated place we go. So if you're not building these relationships across racial and ethnic differences at work, you're probably not doing it at all. And I talk to a lot of folks who are the onlys at work, the only Black woman, the only Indian man, the only person of color. And that gets to be a pretty lonely existence because well-meaning white people don't say anything because they're afraid they'll say the wrong thing. Now, I want you to think about that. If you're one of those well-meaning white people, imagine what that means. If everybody well-meaning says nothing, who does that leave those folks with? And what's their day-to-day experience like? If you are in the majority in your organization, make it your job to reach out to the onlys, to be okay with saying the wrong thing, apologizing, and doing better tomorrow. Because if you don't do it, who's going to? See, your workplace culture is all about the sum total of the experiences of the people, of the interactions that people have there every day. And if there are people in your organization who don't have any interactions or any positive interactions all day, what does that say about your culture? Don't wait for somebody else to address that. Do it yourself. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to make mistakes. But you have to learn from them and do better. Now, CHAMP is a measure of the depth of your network. The first 6 letters of IGNORE are a measure of the breadth of your network. The E is a measure of the depth of those individual relationships. So if you have exchanged stories with the people in your network, stories about times when you've struggled, when you weren't the hero, when your values were tested, when your values were formed, and you know those stories about them, put an X in the E column. Now, why is this important? Well, again, going back to brain science, when we tell each other stories, our mirror neurons are activated, our dopamine kicks in, we start to feel empathy for other people. Stories build trust. Chemically in our bodies, build trust. Trust builds relationships, and relationships make or break careers. I'm willing to bet that there's nobody on this call, not one of you, who hasn't gotten a job opportunity, a project opportunity, some benefit in your career because of someone that you knew or someone who knew someone else. And when you're top of mind is when you've built strong relationships, and you build strong relationships by building trust, and you build trust by telling these stories. The people that you're still connected with from your first job out of college, probably the ones that you share these kinds of stories with. The people you'll be connected with 20 years from now are the ones that you're going to share those stories with today. Don't leave trust on the table. Don't leave talent on the table. We got a lot of problems in this industry, and we need everybody all in every day doing the hard work to keep this economy going, to keep people investing in our, in our infrastructure, to keep people investing in our economy, to protect what people care about most. We cannot afford for anyone to sit out. Let's talk about including others on purpose. There are a lot of ways to make people feel excluded, but there are a lot of ways to make people feel included as well. And it's different for everyone. Now, for me, I feel included when people pronounce my last name correctly. And for those of you who didn't catch it, Tony, you want to tell them how to remember how to pronounce my name?
Absolutely. Amy Waninger, as in you'll be wanting her to speak again.
This is the most cheesy thing, but it works and everybody remembers it. So, but why is that important to me? Well, one, because I'm building a brand around my name, of course. But two, thanks, Tony. But two, I worked for 3 years in a department where 2 of the men that I worked with day to day refused to pronounce my name correctly, even though my name changed halfway through my tenure there. Now, what that told me was I was not welcome. They didn't want me there. Because there were people with much harder to pronounce last names above them in the org chart. They knew how to spell and pronounce those. Respect is a matter of priority. And I learned really quickly that I wasn't respected. So I'm going to ask you real quick in the chat, when do you feel included? And I'm going to use Tony's example. Tony likes it when people put the tilde above the N in his name, because it's Tony Cañas, not Canas, right? And when people go out of their way to do that, is it Alt 164, Tony? Alt 164 to put the tilde over the N, he knows that somebody went out of their way to include him. But what's yours? And do the people that you work with know it? Because if you always feel included when somebody invites you to happy hour, but you never go to happy hour, and they stop including you, right? They stop inviting you. They don't know that they're being exclusive. Maybe they think that they're just, granting your wish, right? To be left alone. Hillary says, when people spell her name right with 2 L's, yes, absolutely. Invited into the conversation or asked for my opinion. Thank you, Ruth. Absolutely. And, sometimes people hold back because they don't know that they're welcome to speak up. And if you're a leader in your organization, whether you have the title or not, it's your job to invite people in. It's your job to ask, Ruth, do you have something you'd like to add? Do you have something you'd like to share? What are your thoughts on this? Let's see. When people include my entire last name, not one or the other, if you have a hyphenated last name, absolutely. Hi, Precious, by the way. It's good to see you here. When people recognize that being a rebel isn't a bad thing. Yes. When you challenge the status quo, it's because you want people to do better. You want to see things improve, not because you're being difficult. Absolutely. All right. Thank you all for sharing. Please use this as a tool in your teams for team building. Please don't be shy about what makes you feel included. and tell your stories. Okay, I realize that we are like 1 or 2 minutes over time. Here's what I want to ask you to do. I want you to power pose with me for just a moment. If you're familiar with Amy Cuddy's work on power posing, okay, so I used to make people hula hoop with me, but it's hard to do that virtually. So pretend for a moment that you've got a hula hoop that you're holding out to your sides. Okay, you feel how your shoulders are back and your chest is out and you feel a little bit more powerful than you did a few minutes ago? All right, imagine that hula hoop around you. A lot of times when we think about diversity and inclusion, we think about big problems like glass ceilings and systemic racism and a whole host of other things that we cannot individually solve. But here's what I want you to think about instead. You are responsible for everything that happens inside your hula hoop. You have the power to control it. You have the power to own what happens in there. And until you've mastered that, you can't master anything else. You can make that hula hoop an inclusive space, and you can take it with you everywhere you go. You can decide who's in your inner circle, and you can decide how to build your circle of influence by setting an example that others can follow. And in fact, that's the only way you can do it. I want to thank you all so much for your time, for your participation today. Thank you, Matthew and Patrick and others on the board for having me today. And it's just always a pleasure to speak to my folks, my CPCU folks. Thank you. I will hang out if you all have any questions for me.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you, Amy.
We have plenty of time. We have at minimum 15 minutes. So for anyone that wants to ask a question, I invite you to unmute and ask away.
Thank you all for the feedback in the chat. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Tony. Oh, Tony, did you have a bet going with Tina about a drink if it wasn't good?
I offered that in the chat. And by the way, offers open to anybody. If anybody didn't enjoy the session, find me at the next annual meeting or leadership summit, and I'll buy you a drink.
Oh my goodness. That's a lot of pressure. I'm glad I didn't see that early on. And Tina, I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear from some folks what you got out of the session. What's your one takeaway? What's something that you will do differently? Because, so many times we walk out of these sessions with, a lot of theory, but not a lot of stuff that we can actually do. Would anybody willing to share? You're also quiet.
Yeah, Amy, I have to say, I get something new out of this session every single time. But I think the most important thing is after having sat through it the first time, when I put together my champ network, there was obviously some work that needed to be done. And because this requires kind of active pursuit and also kind of refreshing your network, not necessarily like getting rid of people, but you're never going to be able to address all of the different elements of it like immediately, right? So it takes time. So the first time I did it, I made some changes, right? And I actively pursued like 1 or 2 connections or deepening those connections that already existed to try and address those kind of gaps, I would say. And every single time I go through this, putting together that matrix, I'm like, that's an area I need to work on. So that's something that everyone, even if you don't, but you should totally fanboy Amy like Tony does. But even if you don't go to this, go to Amy's, talk a bunch of different times, definitely break out that matrix and from time to time, pick at least one thing, right? Like the longest journey starts with a single step. Pick at least one thing, one new relationship, or one thing that you could do to deepen a relationship that's already on there to kind of address this.
Thank you. Mike, yeah.
I echo Matt's comment. I think, there's so many things that go on in our lives every day, right? And I'm the sort of person that I need those little reminders around. I got a little Post-it note on my desk that reminds me about the kind of decisions I make. I heard this once. It says decisions are made emotionally and justified rationally, which if you think about it, that's absolutely true. It's right on my computer screen here next to the phone, which is a good place to have it. But I think, and I've been to your session more than once, and I, like Matt, I've learned different things. I do it. This is a progress check, I guess, for myself. But I'm going to try and figure out a way that I can take this matrix and make it that it's visible to me all the time, so that I can manage my way through that.
Have I got the thing for you,
a little
Mike?
card, something. But
I
that
got
would be
it.
really helpful.
So I actually created a journal. And every time you interact with somebody, you take notes. You can fill out at the bottom, I don't know if you can see that, where they fit into your network. And then you can go through it like the flip books from when you were a kid that made the animation, and you can see who's missing over time.
That's probably the one book I don't have of yours.
Well, there you go.
But that's a great idea. Just something to keep it top of mind, so that
I
you're
have like a
thinking about it
whole
all
shelf
the time.
of those. So.
I think that's why Tony keeps coming. I think.
Yeah.
It's a way to just keep this in your head, so you're thinking about it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you so much. Mike's the reason that I got involved in CPCU, for those of you who don't know, because in the very first time I heard him speak, and I think Abby's on here, or at least I saw her earlier. I don't know if she dropped. But I spent my whole career feeling like an outsider as a woman in IT. And then when I came to insurance, I felt like an outsider as an IT person in insurance. And the very first time I heard Mike speak, Abby was sitting in the front row, and he said something about Abby being one of his mentors. And I had never heard somebody in Mike's position. He was president of the society at that time. I had never heard somebody in his position call out a younger woman as a mentor. And I thought, this is a place where I could maybe contribute something. And it was the first time in my career I'd ever felt that way. And I was 17 years in. So thank you, Mike, so much.
Amy, I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
And I'm going to stumble over it because I don't even know how to ask it. So everything in the world right now is overly charged, especially anything with race, ethnicity. Everything is right, everything's wrong. I don't even know how to start conversations or ask questions the right way without potentially insulting someone or causing a ruckus. So for those of us that want to try to be better, how do you do that without getting off on the wrong foot?
Sure. So first of all, I want to speak to your notion that this is overly charged. Those of us who don't have to talk to our children about how to not get killed when they walk out of the house really need to think about the nature of what's political and what's not. If my kids have a run-in with the police, I assume that the police are there to help them, and not everybody has that luxury. So I want to be very clear about, what some of us feel is political is really just survival for other people. And I want to be very sensitive to that. I would say that if you are trying to understand how to process what may be for you for the first time seeing racism in your community or in our country, I would recommend that you follow thought leaders who do not look like you, and specifically Black thought leaders who speak on these issues and who write about these issues consistently. Follow them on social media, read their books, read their blogs, listen to their podcasts. And not so that you will understand one person's perspective, right? But so that you will understand a multitude of perspectives, and you can pick out the nuance and pick out you know, kind of some of the absolutes, right? And some of the differences of opinion within a community. We are so fortunate right now in that we have access to conversations that do not need us as their audience, but we can still be the audience for those conversations. So if you can follow Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver, for example, if you can follow Roland Martin, if you can follow Dr. Kendi, who wrote, help me, How to Be an Anti-Racist. If you can follow some of these people who are thought leaders in this space on social media and listen to the conversation as they're having it with each other, not for your eyes, but for each other, you will go a long way toward understanding what's really at issue and what are the perspectives. And, you know, you can watch other people step in this the wrong way and learn from their bad example. And you can also see people who are being effective as allies and how they step up and learn from their example. But I think it's incumbent upon us to understand from the perspective of the people who are struggling right now, especially, what's helpful and what's not. Does that help, Patrick?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's a starting point. I will say, you know, just trying to listen to other points of view is definitely helpful.
Mm-hmm. And I would invite anyone else who, you know, who would like to speak up and offer some advice, because I recognize that my perspective is both privileged and limited on that topic.
And I would just remind everyone that we will be raffling off a copy of Networking Beyond Bias that Amy was gracious enough to provide to us. Actually, there's going to be a couple of copies. One will be raffled off randomly to someone who attended the session. And then we will also have a couple other copies that will be part of a raffle for our feedback survey. And then also there's going to be a bundle of the Insurance Nerds books, which will include a copy for our general session. So yeah, I want to say thank you, Amy. This was a great session. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think there is a new, Patrick, there's a new link for the next session that Rita should have been or is about to open, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so anyone who does intend to attend Rita's Making Ethical Decisions, I believe that room imminently or even currently is open. So you just have to navigate back to the main NJI Day 2020 page and click the link for that room. So thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this. We appreciate it.